The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
I encourage you to join me as I pray in my tradition. Almighty God, as we gather in this chamber, and we serve the people of our great state, I humbly come before you, seek your wisdom and guidance for these that will make weighty decisions that lie ahead. Grant them clarity to see the needs of their constituents, the courage to act with integrity, the humility to listen to diverse perspectives. I pray their deliberations be marked by civility, compassion, and a deep commitment to the common good. I pray for their unity and their purpose, that we may work together to build a better future for Minnesota, from the epicenter here in St. Paul to the angle where the residents hold on to their U.S. citizenship, but even more so to being Minnesotan, because to them it means something and it's worth fighting for. I ask you to bless this House of Representatives with your presence. Guide their steps in the path of justice and righteousness. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Chaplain Keith Beckwith, Minnesota National Guard, St. Paul, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting or participating remotely.
Gander.
Go ahead, Steve.
Gander.
Gander, present.
Gander, present. Hicks.
Hicks, present.
Hicks, present.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 94th Session, 2025, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, February 26, 2025.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved and as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted.
Thanks.
Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File number 249.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File number 360.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File number 747.
Second reading.
And second reading, House File number 1034.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House File 1616 through House File 1743.
First reading House files 1616 through 1743. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate file numbers 571, 1075, and 1552. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
First reading Senate file number 571, an act relating to trusts. Scott moved that Senate file number 571 and House file number 360, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
First reading Senate file number 1075, an act relating to transportation. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Transportation, Finance, and Policy. First reading Senate file number 1552, an act relating to agriculture. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Agriculture, Finance, and Policy.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
NISCA from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, March 3rd, 2025, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bill. House file number 12.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 289. The clerk will report the bill.
House file number 289, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government, the first engrossment.
There are amendments at the desk. If there is no objection, we will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And frankly, if we're to have the most
effective and efficient government in the state. We need to involve the frontline workers, the people who are actually servicing and helping our citizens to have a greater voice. The idea for this bill came when I attended a union meeting, and they said, it's that time of year again. We need someone on a committee to figure out what we're going to spend it on so we don't lose it. And that was sort of a common thing of where you had money left over and you came up with a way of spending it. I said to them, what are your feelings if, instead of spending it, if you saved it and half went to the general fund, the other half went to an account of where the administration, the workers, or the faculty and the administration decided with a committee how to spend it to help your mission. So this bill is meant to listen to our frontline workers that are helping our citizens, give them that voice, allow them to find savings and efficiencies, and then allow them part of that money to get what they need to do their job. We do a great job of guessing, but oftentimes there's a slightly different need at in the departments and at the point of the work. And so this bill is meant for efficiency, meant for savings, but also importantly is meant for listening to the voice of the workers of our state that are working with our citizens, and then giving them an incentive to be able to get what they really need when they give us savings. So I'll sit down and wait for the amendment.
Representative Cleavorn offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Cleavorn moves to amend House File Number 289, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A2.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Cleavorn, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you. And members, this amendment is very simple. When Representative Quam first introduced this bill as his first bill in the legislature, he put a sunset on the bill. In speaking with Representative Quam, I hope that he will accept this as a friendly amendment, and it restores the bill to the original way that he introduced it originally, with a sunset. That sunset would be June 30, 2030. So I would ask that you consider this a friendly amendment and vote yes. Thank you.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I view this as friendly.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails, and the amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk, and the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 289, as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion? I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for bringing this forward, Representative Quam. Enjoyed hearing this in committee. I think this does present an opportunity for there to be some innovation in state agencies. It would have been nice last time if it had been used a little more, but I'm hopeful that the circumstances will be a little different this time. I think it's a creative way to use existing resources. So I will be voting yes on this bill and would encourage members on my side to do so as well.
Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Gander votes yes.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Okay, go.
Hicks votes yes.
Hicks votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 133 yeas and 0 nays, the bill passes and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar is House File 72. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 72, an act relating to campaign expenditures.
There are amendments at the desk. If there is no objection, we will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So, under current law, there's an inherent and systemic conflict of interest between politicians and nonprofit organizations who can receive direct state aid that's authored and passed by those same politicians. And those nonprofits are eligible to spend in elections-related matters, even if it's indirectly. When a nonprofit organization requests funding from the state, it should be a common sense notion that we expect those funds to go towards the service that the nonprofit is claiming they're providing for the taxpayers. In 2023, $1.1 billion in state appropriations went directly to an earmarked nonprofit organization. And they have a statutory eligibility to donate directly to political groups. My bill, House File 72, that would end that. This is a dark money loophole, and I think that with passage of this today, it starts to return political influence back to the Minnesota voters that we work for and takes it back from unelectable, unaccountable nonprofits who are doing this under the guise of being a nonprofit. Thank you.
Representative Engen offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Engen moves to amend House File number 72. The amendment is coded A25008.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Engen, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment, I've spoken to Representative Greenman on it, and I think that it does what we're intending to do, while still allowing for that transparency piece when it comes to the separation of funds between what they've raised and what they currently have on hand and what they would, if anything, get from the state. And so I would ask that you support the amendment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment narrows the scope of the bill. I'm not totally sure how much it accomplishes since 501c3s can't make political expenditures anyway, but the bill covers entities besides nonprofits. So this amendment may provide clarity to entities not covered by nonprofit tax law that this bill covers. So I'm fine suggesting my members vote yes on this amendment since it is something of a clarification and it narrows the scope of the bill.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment vote aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Greenman moves to amend House File number 72. As amended, the amendment is coded A3.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This A3 amendment is a bill that we talked about in committee that I think is an important one, and I think it is a complement to the bill. There's broad consensus that there's too much money in our politics, and I really appreciate the focus on that in this bill. This is the Voters' Right to Know Amendment. If we are concerned about the way that folks who get state money are spending it, and if they're spending them in elections, we need to know who they are. And in Minnesota right now, if you're spending on the independent expenditure side, you can hide your spending through a shell game of Russian nesting dolls, and we wouldn't know. And so all this bill does is say that voters have the right to know who is spending. By adopting this provision, Minnesotans will finally be able to track the true amount and sources of the tens of millions of dollars that go into negative ads. This bill will end that shell game. So, but it's probably a better conversation for Elections Committee. I've had a conversation with the author about the conversation. So on this one, I'll withdraw it.
Representative Greenman withdraws her amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Greenman moves to amend House File Number 72 as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
I recognize the member, the author of the amendment, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment also, we had a good discussion about in committee. It would clarify who is covered under this bill and what state funds include. Right now, the definition is broad, and I share the concern. I think that my caucus shares the concern about the amount of money that organizations and entities are spending in our elections, and appreciate the focus on really looking at those companies that are getting financial benefit, whether it's grants, tax expenditures, contracts. What this amendment does is make clear what interpretation of the law already is, that corporations or nonprofits who benefit from government spending are prevented from spending in our election. But in the week I've had since the bill, since the bill hearing, I've actually gotten a chance to dig in and review the language a little closer. I'm confident that the bill already accomplishes the goal of this amendment, and so with that, I'll withdraw this one too.
Representative Greenman has withdrawn the amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 72 as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion? I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill resides in Chapter 211B, which does not define the term organization or the term entity or the term state funding. The bill itself does not define organization or entity. It says nonprofits are included, but it does not say that it applies exclusively to nonprofits. So this bill includes nonprofits, but it's not exclusive to nonprofits, which means it also covers corporations. Similarly, the bill does not define state funding. It says that direct appropriations and grants are state funding, but it does not say that they are the only forms of government spending that qualify. So as Representative Greenman said, tax expenditures, tax credits, and tax deductions are examples of state funding. So this bill prohibits campaign spending by corporations who receive state funds, including tax expenditures, which moves us away from Citizens United, which is a good thing. And we've added the clarifying amendment, which we didn't have in committee. So given those facts, I'm comfortable voting for this bill and suggest my colleagues do so as well if they are so inclined.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I realize that I'm not always very good about giving credit where it's due. So I do want to start off by saying, Representative Engen, that I appreciate what I believe is a sincere desire on your part to get dark money out of politics. Frankly, I think there's just too much money of any shade in politics right now. Where I come from, a lot of folks still think $100 is a pretty big check to cut. And honestly, I'm one of them. So the idea that obscenely rich people and big corporations can write checks many times that size without batting an eye is pretty disturbing. As Representative Freiberg mentioned, there are some missing definitions and vague terms that I didn't fully appreciate in committee. And it's still a little unclear to me what effect the amendment that we just adopted would have, but I do agree that this bill is a step toward recognizing the degrading influence that dark money has in our elections. And it does seem to indicate what many of us have said before, that public dollars by any other name are still public dollars. And as Representative Freiberg also mentioned, that would, to my mind, include things like, for example, the $40 million that we spend on a state sales tax deduction for airplanes bought by airlines, $61 million in a state sales tax deduction for telecom equipment bought by telecom companies to provide telecom services, the $275 million we spent on the dividends received deduction, which I still don't entirely understand, but near as I can figure out is basically a tax break for big businesses who get stock dividends from other big businesses. It might even include the $123 million that it costs the state to exempt insurance companies from the corporate franchise tax. Airlines, telecoms, insurance companies, other big corporations. Seems like they might all have some interest in who wins elections in the state of Minnesota. That's $500 million that we shelled out to them in just 1 year. So if the goal here is really to rein in dark money coming from who knows where and to address something that really doesn't smell right to a lot of folks, and the language of the bill seems to imply, at least, that that includes big corporations, I can vote for this. And I hope this is only the beginning of a serious, bipartisan conversation about how we can lessen the power of dark money. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't think we'd get here this quick. I think that what you see is there's broad consensus that there's too much money, too much dark money, too much corporate money, just too much money in our elections. The voices of voters, the voices of Minnesotans are being drowned out by those corporations, those wealthy few that can spend, have their corporate proffers or just coffers, or just have the tens of thousands, tens of millions of dollars to elect people who will advance their interests, not the interests of those voters in our community. And I really appreciate Representative Engen's focus on this issue. I've been working on this issue most of my career on getting dark money, getting corporate money, getting special interest money out of our politics. And we passed a lot of really important bills last year to increase transparency, or in the last biennium, and to move ourselves on the direction. But who knew it just took a Republican author to get bipartisan support for a campaign finance bill, and I really appreciate that here today. So when I think about this bill, I think it's really illustrative of something we're seeing here and at the federal level. And what I know is if we pass this bill today, if this bill had been passed in Congress, that Elon Musk, who got billions of dollars in grants, in financing, in subsidies for Starlink, for Tesla, for his organizations, wouldn't have been able to go then spend $277 million to elect Donald Trump, who then did exactly what this bill is worried about, went into government and is now rifling through our data and our agencies, firing workers, and frankly going after the agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Agency that are actually trying to regulate his own businesses. So the conflict of interest issue is real, and if we had had a bill like this at the federal level, it would have been able to stop that. And here in Minnesota, it will equally, the language of this bill, the entity and organizations that get money from something like the Minnesota investment funds, the $1 million that went to Comcast in St. Paul, the $4 million that went to DigiKey in Thief River Falls, the $200,000 that went to Polaris in Wyoming, those folks, those entities, those organizations, the corporations, nonprofits, they also wouldn't be able to spend in our elections in order to elect politicians that were friendly to their interests. So this bill does something that I will say that we didn't do in the last 2 years, which is keep those corporations, those corporate coffers that are spending on the independent expenditure side and also getting government benefits from spending in our elections. And I am that makes me pretty excited to vote for this bill. Ever since Citizens United, the Supreme Court opened up Citizens United and opened up the corporate spending in our elections, I think we have heard, and you probably hear it from your voters, I've heard it from folks across the political spectrum, that secret spending of outside groups in our elections has skyrocketed. We know it. That's the evidence. Here in Minnesota, in 2020, $41 million were spent in legislative races on the outside, $21.5 million in the governor's race, $8.4 million in the attorney general's race. Those are all outside spending, and we should absolutely make sure, and with this bill, it's not how I would have drafted, it's very broad, but to that point, it ensures that those folks that are getting the benefit of a tax break or a grant financing a tax expenditure, as we heard Representative Coulter talk about, that those folks actually won't then turn around and use those resources in our elections. Now, what we know about 501c3s and nonprofits is that they can't. Federal law prohibits them from spending in our elections, and the amendment that we added actually just makes that very clear. But there is nothing in federal or state law that stops a corporation from getting a tax expenditure or getting a grant or getting a tax benefit and then using what they got to go and elect politicians who then they come back and ask for more. So when we think about what this bill does, that actually is the most important and powerful piece. So by adopting this bill, we are actually taking on one of the things that I think Minnesotans have sent us here to do. They have sent us here to represent their voices. They have sent us here to be responsive to their needs, to our community's needs across the state. And this moves us a big step in the right direction. And so I would say, it's not how I would have drafted it, but it is a concept and a policy that I support. And again, members, I think that if we can continue working on bills like this that protect the voices of Minnesotans and really get out the problem of dark money, corporate money in our politics, we're gonna have a good session. So members, I'd say vote yes.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the discussion. I think that this does open up a dialogue about dark money in politics across the board. And in some aspects, it's mutually assured destruction, right? We know that both sides have engaged in it. And in a prior Republican Party that I wasn't here for, I would say maybe the Mitt Romney Republican Party, if I were to speak quite candidly, most of us on this side of the aisle would say we were the party of Wall Street. And we're not anymore. We're the party of the worker who showers before and after work, tradesmen, people who are working with their hands. And we're proud to be that party. And so we're going to stand for bills like this that rein in that money wherever it's coming from. But simultaneously, in 2020, we weren't the party of big money. We weren't the party of Wall Street. In fact, it was double the amount of money that Democrats had raised from Wall Street on top of the nonprofit spending that was occurring and going towards elections-related outcomes. Here's an article here that I pulled. A massive Minnesota free food nonprofit listed a curious job description recently in late May. Second Harvest Heartland posted an opening for a voter engagement coordinator. The CEO, Allison O'Toole, formerly worked for Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton and U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and is paid nearly $700,000 a year to run this nonprofit, who, according to themselves, this is on their website, they recruit, train, and manage volunteers to table, canvass, phone bank, text bank, and go door-to-door canvassing. That, to me, sounds like an inherent conflict of interest. Minnesotans should not be forced to unknowingly fund people who are actively working against their own values. And that's on both sides of the table. So I think that this is a great start. We should continue this dialogue. We should continue looking for ways to make more transparent our elections-related spending. So thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 72. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes aye.
Hicks votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 21. The clerk will report the bill.
File number 21, an act relating to state government, the number 1 on the calendar for the day.
There are amendments at the desk. If there's no objection, we will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, today I rise to bring forward House File 21, which would fundamentally change the orientation of the governor's emergency powers. As those of you who remember well from 2020 and 2021, the current structure of the governor's emergency powers in Minnesota is that he can declare an emergency, and then that emergency can only be ended by a majority vote of the House and Senate. This bill will change that fundamental orientation so that the governor can still declare an emergency, but after 14 days, the emergency would expire automatically unless it was extended by a 3/5 vote of both the House and the Senate. So the emergency power declared by the governor would automatically end unless there was a supermajority vote, same amount as a bonding bill, in both houses. Members, this is very important. We all lived through the 16-month emergency of 2020 and 2021, whether you were members here coming to a monthly special session like I was, or whether you were in your district suffering with your kids not being in school, with businesses being closed down, with not being able to go to church or have family and friends over to your home. So it's very important that we fix the orientation of emergency powers in Minnesota so that clearly the governor needs to be able to declare an emergency if there's a terrible tragedy or a tornado or a nuclear meltdown or a cyber attack or a terrorist attack of some sort. but that power must be strictly limited, and that power must be shared with the legislative branch of government. So I look forward to the discussion tonight, and I look forward to the amendments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Robbins offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend House Law Number 21. The amendment is coded A1.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Robbins, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this amendment came to my attention, and I think it's, I'm happy to add it to the bill. Basically, it says that after the 14 days expires, the governor cannot just automatically declare a new 14-day emergency on the same set of circumstances. So it just precludes that situation where the governor might say, oh, I'm just going to renew the emergency in that vein. So for the same set of circumstances, the governor would not be able to declare another emergency under this amendment. I urge a yes vote.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you, members. To set the stage here, my remarks on the A1 today will focus primarily on lines 1.14 and why the governor not having the ability to act puts us in a very bad place. Nationally, the number of cyber incidents are mind-boggling. As AI tools improve, so does the ability of hackers to stage a successful cyber attack. And if the power of AI scares you, wait for quantum computing, with the power to expose your valuable data and your privacy. That is an emergency. As we speak, top cyber criminals in countries like Russia, China, and Iran, who are not our friends, and they don't play nice, have stables of hackers sponsored by the government whose only mission is to attack places like the United States and our critical targets. Their aim is clear: disrupt, create chaos, and spread mistrust. The more lives they destroy, the more people they hurt, the bigger the target, the better. That's what line 1.14 is, or 1.12 and 1.14 are all about. We know these actors have been poking around in critical infrastructure and attempted to interfere in our Minnesota elections in 2016. From electrical grids to water treatment to nuclear plants, imagine the impact on Minnesotans in the dead of winter or having no fresh drinking water for our families. These actors attacked nuclear plants in the UK, India, and a failed attack here on US soil. Just a reminder, fallout doesn't follow state or national boundaries. That is an emergency. In 2024, there were 106 attacks on critical infrastructure targets, 31,000 attacks targeting the US government. Let's bring it home. In 2024, Minute handled 5,224 cyber incidents. 285 of those were high priority incidents. 2.96% of the over 5,000 were considered critical. Any one of them could have been our next cyber attack. So what does that mean for HF 21 and the A1? With time and persistence, the cyber attack will succeed. The law of averages says we may see the first major cyber security attack within the next decade. So let's talk about the A1 and why it's a terrible idea. The average cyber incident lasts 22 days. According to Statistia in 2024, 29% of organizations in the US reported it took up to a month, and for some, much, much longer. To understand what that means to Minnesota, let me briefly share what happened in the city of Atlanta. In March of 2018, a ransomware attack paralyzed the city. While some critical systems were regained within days, key city services remained disrupted for weeks. Online payment systems weren't restored till May, and law enforcement and digital operations took till June. Why is that a problem in Minnesota? MMB manages our $61.8 billion, including $22.9 billion in federal funds. Imagine with the timelines we see here, if the state can't bring in revenue, if we couldn't process payments for MA and Medicare, delaying care for our elderly, our most vulnerable, and putting critical safety and our hospitals at risk. Imagine if courts can't process active prosecutions and defendants can't get their day in court. Imagine if we can't process nutritional assistance, housing assistance, mobility services to get elders to the grocery store and to church. Imagine the ripple effects. This is an emergency, and its effects don't fit neatly in a 14-day box. We need time to engage with our partners at CISA, Homeland Security, and the FBI. And while this contingent of legislators who appreciate what all of what I'm saying today means continues to grow, if we fail to understand the ramifications and call an emergency over in 14 days, and our state and our neighbors need us, what do? And I want to say for the folks who are chatting over here who aren't getting the gist of what it's like to have a cyber attack and have all of the services for our state shut down, you might want to pay attention. I want to be clear, this scenario I paint here isn't some sort of fantasy. It could be our reality, and very likely it will happen here in the U.S. within the next 10 years. Chapter 12 does not bury the lead. It screams off the page a declaration of a peacetime emergency and clearly spells out the criteria for what constitutes an emergency. Members, I don't know when the next emergency will come. Nearly every year, Minnesota faces a disaster of some kind. We can't tie the hands of the person we need to act quickly. Our citizens expect and demand we do what's necessary to protect their interests. This is the very essence of an emergency. Disaster doesn't have timelines and doesn't fit in a box. And for that reason, members, I urge you to vote no on the A1. That day is coming, and I want to ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nobody likes talking about cybersecurity more than I do. However, if you read in line 1.2 of the amendment, it says if the legislature does not approve the governor's extension request, and I'll stop there. So I have been here for 11 years. We have had a number of emergencies. We have had a number of things that were actually imperiling both the commerce and other parts of our state. If Representative Burkle, I forget where he sits this time. There he is. There were years that we had avian flu. Everybody that walked in here knew that we needed to fix that problem, and a cyber attack would be one of those events where we would all lock arms and say we have to fix this. So if we want to chase our tails, I would suggest that we do it on a different amendment. This is a fine amendment, and I can't imagine a legislator worth their salt would say, well, a cyber attack. No, I'm not going to vote to let emergency continue. They would. So I encourage a yes vote because we want to have our counter arguments based in reality, not something that is not really an understanding of what legislators are all here about. Because each and every one of us showed up when it was time to do the avian flu. Each and every one of us would do the same on the scenario that was given here. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? I recognize Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the discussion on the amendment. Members, this is just a common sense amendment. If there is a terrible emergency that necessitates longer than 14 days, there will be bipartisan support for that. If it is a power grab by the executive, the emergency will end after 14 days, and we will all know the difference. And more importantly, our constituents will know. And so we are the representatives. We are the voice of the people. If there is a huge cyber attack and systems are down, our citizens, our constituents will want us to extend. But if not, this will automatically shut an emergency down, and this amendment just says the governor can then not go behind us and say for the exact same circumstances, there's another emergency. It's very common sense. Please vote yes. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Yes. Go ahead, Steve.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes, 66 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk.
Altendorf moves to amend House File Number 21 as amended. The amendment is coded A6.
I recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members, and thank you, Representative Robbins, for bringing this very common sense bill, this never again bill. And I know many of us here in the chamber have been waiting for this. Many of you were here during that pandemic. And for me and many of the other people who have been elected since 2020, I would say we are in the chamber for that very reason, was watching what happened in the Minnesota state government, the 16 months of emergency powers, the complete overreach that happened here in Minnesota under the tyranny of Governor Walz. And today, my amendment does three simple things. First, it is adding in our constitutional rights that we have been granted, that we cannot ever forget those constitutional rights. The other one is this reduces it from 14 days to 10 days, which would be adequate amount of time for then the legislature, which brings us to the third point. The legislature is the guardrail. With a 3/5 vote, the legislature here has the ability to extend the emergency powers in the case that it would be needed to. Members, in 2020, we saw many things happen. We saw our free speech stampled on. We saw our religious rights. We were told we could not worship. We were told we could not go to church. I have people in my district that were not allowed to go to funerals of loved ones, of parents, of grandparents. And to that, we need to protect that. We have businesses that were shut down. In my little town of Red Wing, one shop was told they could not be open, and then the big box store Walmart was. Never again, folks. Never again. We as people can have informed consent, know the risks, and then make that decision if we are to go to church and to our parents' funeral. Governor Walz allowed a candy shop to be opened on Highway 169, but allowed other small businesses to be shut. We cannot allow one person to tell us that we do not have the ability to work to make an income for our family. Another friend in my district, they have a workout center. That is their family's income. For months and months, they were told that they could not do that. Members, this is very simple. This amendment makes sure we protect our constitutional rights, and yet we are having those guardrails for the legislature to get involved after 10 days. Please vote yes.
Discussion on the amendment. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you. I would request that we divide the A6 amendment between lines 1.16 and lines 1.17.
Representative Cleavorn, the amendment is divisible. The clerk will report on the first portion of the amendment.
Cleavorn is requesting to divide the Altendorf A6 amendment. The first portion would be lines 1.2 to lines 1.16.
Discussion. Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you. I would ask firstly for roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
And then on this first portion of the division, I would like to take the first line, the top of the divide first. Thank you. And I would ask for a yes vote for that.
The top of the what?
Discussion to
That made no sense.
the divided amendment. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and I sure hope everyone votes for this. I sure hope everyone votes for this amendment, but here's the thing. We don't have this language in our current statutes right now. So we can vote to add this into the bill, and I sure hope we will. But if you vote against passing this bill, you're voting against the language. So, go for it. Vote yes on the amendment. But I sure hope we're voting yes on the bill at the end of the day in order to protect our constitutional rights in the case of an emergency, which were trampled on, which have been trampled on. We need to learn the lessons of the past. So yes, vote yes on the Altendorf amendment, on both parts of the Altendorf amendment, and then vote yes on the bill.
Further discussion. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Allendorf yield to a series of questions? I'm sorry. Altendorf, sorry, I'm trying to read the writing here on the amendment.
Representative Altendorf will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So Representative Altendorf, I'm wondering where in the emergency powers it right now gives the governor the right to stop people from exercising their right to free speech. Could you point that out to me?
Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Liebling. This is something to prevent that from happening. That's exactly what it is. It's to prevent it from happening.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So it's to prevent from happening something that he doesn't have already the authority to do under the law, okay? What about, where does it say that he has the right to stop people from keeping and bearing arms in the emergency powers?
Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Liebling. Again, this is moving forward. This is the Never Again bill moving forward, and we are making sure with absolute certainty that none of these constitutional rights would ever be trampled on by any governor in the future.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I was going to go down through some of these other ones, but I think your answer would be the same, that you're trying to put into the law something that already the governor does not have the power to do these things anyway, and you're trying to put them into the law. But now I'll just make a comment on the amendment then, because I think that there would be something to be said for trying to fix this bill by being very specific about things that the governor should not be able to do, but this doesn't do it. And I'll tell you couple things I find really problematic here, and I was going to speak to this on third reading, and I probably will also. But here you're saying that the governor can't stop people from having the right to assemble. So, generally speaking, of course, we don't want governors to infringe on our right to assemble. However, what we saw and what we could see again in the future is an emergency involving an extremely contagious disease. And so what you would be doing here is removing from the governor a very important tool that he may actually really need. Whatever you think about what Walz did in the last one, a governor could really need this tool in order to deal with an emergency. The same thing with the right to operate a business. Now, I understand fully how angry people got and that, you know, that there was a lot of inconsistency in some of the things that people have complained about. But instead of thinking about this and trying to draw some real parameters around what the governor should be able to do, to simply say that the governor should not be able to stop someone from operating a business when, in fact, in an emergency, a particular business may, in fact, need to be curtailed. I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, and I would ask members, notwithstanding that it sounds like nice, harmless language in this first part of the amendment, I would urge members to vote no. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the Altendorf amendment as a whole and as divided. I think what we learned from the last go-around is that these rights weren't protected. People were not allowed to go to church. People were not allowed to have people in their homes. I remember a news story about the governor having set a curfew and law enforcement going out and shooting paintball guns at people who were on their porch talking to their neighbors. Members, it was out of control, and we can never go back to that. So these are just enumerating protections that we should enjoy as citizens. And so I support the Altendorf amendment. I hope everyone votes green. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. So the Altendorf amendment, and thank you, Representative Altendorf, it's enumerating things that we want to put into statutes so that things are more clear than they were previously. And when I was a freshman, I remember several of your members were talking about, oh, we should do belt and suspenders. And I think that's a lot of what this is. But we're being encouraged by your side to not vote to make sure that we have the right to assemble or the freedom of travel. Now you're encouraging us to vote against the freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. That's a strange one. I'm curious as to why you would advocate for that, or you're encouraging us to vote against the freedom from cruel and unusual punishment. Again, I'm deeply confused by this, but I did not have that on my bingo card. So the freedom of conscience, you're encouraging us to vote against. Once again, I think, members, this is just trying to prevaricate the issue of putting something into statute to uphold our rights, to make sure that we are clarifying once again if in a state of emergency under Chapter 12 that we want to make sure that these things are protected for those people who are being impacted in the way that we were impacted when we were under the most notable COVID emergency that went on for far too long. So, members, I would encourage you to read these. I think it will dictate your vote, because why in the world would we vote against on line 1.12 the freedom of the press? Yes, of course, we are afraid of making sure that we're upholding that right. Vote in favor of this. Ignore what you're hearing from the other side, because they are trying to deprive you of your liberties.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you very much. So this side of the aisle is a big tent, right? We don't all have the same opinions. I will say that I would like to remind the body what I asked. So I asked for a division. I asked for a vote on the first half. I asked for a yes vote on this side of the aisle for the first half, and I've asked for a roll call. Thank you.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Cleavorn, for dividing this. I think that was really great, because now on your side of the aisle, we will see who respects and who is voting green for our constitutional rights. And for any of us in this body to pretend that what happened in 2020 did not happen is quite insincere, because we did see our rights be trampled on. Many of us did. And again, this is moving forward. This is for the future. It is our job as legislators to make the language crystal clear so that there is no doubt moving forward what a governor can and cannot do. And I'm just going to end in this quote. Freedom is unlikely to be lost all at once, and it is far more likely to be eroded away bit by bit. Thomas Sowell. And this, by voting green on the constitutional rights, you are voting for our Constitution.
Members, as a reminder, we are voting on the dividing of, so the first portion of the A6 amendment, we are voting on lines 1.1 through 1.6 of the A6 amendment. A roll call has been requested. The clerk,
Madam Speaker,
state your point of order.
it's actually point of parliamentary inquiry, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary inquiry, state your point.
Madam Speaker, could you please repeat the exact lines we're voting on? I believe you said 1.6, but I think you may have meant 1.16. If you could please clarify, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I will clarify. We are voting on the first portion, that is lines 1.2 through 1.16. A green vote supports that first portion. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the roll, or call the names of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Go ahead, Steve.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes yes.
Hicks votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 6 nays, the divided amendment first portion is adopted. The clerk will report the second half of the amendment.
The second portion of the Altendorf Amendment, as requested a division by Cleavorn, is page 1, lines 17 through 20.
Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you again for allowing me this division. Members, on this second half, the second portion, I would ask for a no vote, and I would also ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Cleavorn.
Excuse me. No, that is my motion. That is my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Altendorf.
All right, members, again, thank you for dividing this. I think this is really quite clear, and thank you for all the green votes on the constitutional rights. I'm very, very happy and encouraged to see how many members in here are supporting our Constitution and our freedoms living here in the United States. With the second half, I know you suggested to vote no. I would suggest to vote yes. A no vote is you are literally voting for a tyrannical government. You are voting with a no vote for a dictator. You are voting for a one person to rule. This is really quite clear because we put in the guardrails. Representative Robbins did a wonderful job on this and helped me on this amendment. And with after 10 days, so 10 days of an emergency powers, members, which should be quite adequate, we then would move to a 3/5 vote of the legislature. This doesn't mean if there is a real emergency that I am quite certain that the members of this body, see, I trust the body. I trust the people who are elected, and that's what this vote does. A green vote gives the decision to us. A red vote says that you are voting for a dictator in this type of situation. And I'm just going to end with this. The reason why you should vote yes is it's crystal clear. Many of the states around us did not have any of these things happening in the state, and yet did not see increased numbers of cases or of deaths. And yet the body allowed this state to be run and trampled on by Governor Walz. Please vote yes.
As a reminder, members, we will be voting on the second portion of the A6 amendment, lines 1.17 through 1.20. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Say that again.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no.
The clerk will take the roll. Close the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 66 nays, the second portion of the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Long moves to amend House File Number 21 as amended. The amendment is coded DE1.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Long, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Altendorf had referred to House File 21, the underlying bill, as the Never Again bill twice. But unless I'm mistaken, the amendment that I am authoring is the Never Again Act, which is House File 26. And let me state up front, this is not my idea. This was introduced by Representative Roach, with co-authors from Speaker Demuth, Representative Niska, Representative Nash, and others. And we've seen a lot of bills that have skipped committee stops this session on a fast track to come to the floor. We saw House File 14 skipped Government Ops and Ways and Means. House File 20 skipped State Government and Ways. House File 12 skipped Judiciary. But unfortunately, the Never Again Act has been referred to the Veterans Committee and laid over on its path to the floor. So my intent on offering this today is simply to give members a choice between two very different approaches, I guess the Never Again bill and the Never Again Act. And they take very different tacks on emergency declarations. To be clear, I plan to vote no on this amendment. I support current law, but I did want House File 26 to have the opportunity to not be laid over indefinitely and never again be seen on the floor. So I ask members for a no vote.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise under House Rules 3.21, germaneness. As Representative Long, I'm sure, knows, the House File 26 that he just referenced, in addition to Chapter 12, covers 34A, 35, 41B, 144, 151, 207C. And while this is the Robbins bill only has Chapter 12, and I'm sure that Representative Roach is flattered by your admiration of his bill. It is working its way through the committee process, and it is far more expansive. So for that, Madam Speaker, I urge that you find the amendment out of order, and I am prepared to offer advice if you haven't had enough already.
State your advice.
That it is wildly more expansive, and that is not permitted per our rule.
Advice, Madam Speaker.
State your advice.
Madam Speaker, this amendment is very clearly germane. The subject matter is exactly the same, which is the governor's emergency powers. They are both rooted in Chapter 12. Representative Nash remarks that there are a couple of provisions in the bill that are beyond the chapter, but those are simply to have technical amendments that are necessary because of the amendments that are made to Chapter 12. So Chapter 12, the amendments would remove the ability of the governor to have the option of calling an emergency and put it in the hands of the legislature. And so there are conforming amendments that then are made throughout the law to strike governor and include legislature. But all of that is rooted in the exact same subject matter, which is that these are related to the governor's emergency powers and related to the Chapter 12. So this is both the same subject and does not expand the scope, and it is substantially the same section of law, and any provisions that are outside of that section of law are simply technical fixes that are a result of the Chapter 12 amendments. And I ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands. I believe we'll be carrying this further, and there will be a roll call requested later when you appeal it. Any further discussion? I've studied the amendment, I've reviewed the bill and considered your advice, and I am ruling that the point of order is not well taken.
Madam Speaker, point of clarification.
Point of clarification.
Madam Speaker, I made the point of order that the amendment was not germane, and just wanted to make sure that I may have misheard you.
I am ruling that the point of order is well taken.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Long.
Yeah, I had suspected that might have been the way you go, and so I requested a roll call previously, but I would like to make a roll call, appeal the ruling of the Speaker and request a roll call.
Representative Long has appealed the ruling of the Speaker and has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion. And the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as judgment of the House? Representative Liebling.
Madam Speaker, may I speak to whether the body should uphold the ruling of the Speaker? Okay, that's what I'm speaking to. So, members, take a look at this amendment. The very beginning of it talks about all these rights in the Constitution. And we were just told that if we vote against this, we're voting against the Constitution. So, as you take your vote, You should rule against, you should vote against the ruling of the Speaker. Otherwise, you are voting against the Constitution, as Representative Nash just told you a few minutes ago. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. While I appreciate the clever point, I would point out that the amendment before us includes delete everything after the enacting clause, which deletes the language about the constitutional rights, and then, I guess, reinserts it. So if we were accepting this amendment as germane and voting on the merits, the point still wouldn't make any sense. But we're not. We're voting on germaneness. We're voting on whether or not a bill that touches on several other areas of law and touches several other places in our statute books can be substituted in without going through the committee stops that this bill would need to go through. I am certainly a supporter of the approach in the DE amendment. It is better than the status quo. It is better than the status quo, which gives the governor the unilateral power to declare an emergency and have a bare partisan majority in one house, allow the governor to continue to rule the state without the input of the legislature. Frankly, I'm not sure why anyone who bothered to run for the legislature wouldn't support either one of these approaches, but the fact of the matter is the DE1 amendment is not germane to the discussion we're having before us. It covers a lot of other issues that need to be covered, that would need to go through other committee stops in order to make sure that they get them right. I know that that House File 26 is not indefinitely laid over in the Veterans Committee. It's being pulled back into the State Government Committee to continue to be worked on. But regardless of that point, the Speaker's ruling is absolutely correct. Members should vote to uphold the ruling of the Speaker. Vote aye.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would urge members to vote against the ruling of the Speaker and in favor of my appeal, in favor of the first ruling of the Speaker. And in this case, the bills, as I mentioned, are both to Chapter 12. They are both to the governor's emergency powers. The argument that my colleagues across the aisle are making is a pretty thin thread, which is saying that because there are technical cross-reference changes in other sections of law, changing references from governor to legislature, that is somehow expanding the scope of the bill. That is a real stretch from our germaneness interpretations. We have two bills that are literally on the same subject. One of them is called the Never Again Bill. One of them is called the Never Again Act. I don't know how these are not germane to each other. So I would ask that members vote to not uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
I recognize the member from, I recognize Representative Wolgamott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Madam Speaker, before we take a vote on this appeal, I'd just like to clarify which ruling it is that we are appealing. You made one ruling, and then without having an appeal to the Speaker, you made another ruling. I just want to be clear which ruling that we're appealing before I vote. Thank you.
I am ruling that the point of order is well taken, and I will repeat again, a yes or a green vote will support the ruling of the Speaker, a no or a red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For those of you that have had the benefit of being here for more than a couple of weeks, we'll reach back into history when we were in the minority and we would bring several amendments and Representative Long or Representative Winkler would rule them out of order because they had other chapters of law in the amendment, and that was bad. But here, Representative Long has now said that given that there is 34A, 35, 41B, 144, 151, and 207C, that is now magically okay. And I would point out to you who would like to read this are the other parts of the amendment that he is bringing that he believes it's okay to skip. Those are just technical. They're a trifle. And I think the most comedic thing that he just said, that changing from the governor to the legislature is just a small change, kids. It's okay. That is a really large change. So Representative Long is telling us that we should ignore their past practice. We should ignore the rules of our House that we have adopted. We should ignore the fact that there are like 9 other chapters of law in his DE and vote to overturn the ruling of the Speaker, who ruled appropriately that this was out of order. Now, the other bill is moving through the committee process, and it is more expansive, and that's why it has more committee stops, Representative Long, because there are other chapters of law that they have to go to that have jurisdiction over those. So if it was just Chapter 12 and only Chapter 12, then we'd have a thing. You'd actually maybe have a good argument, but you don't, because there are multiple other chapters of law. So a green vote is the vote we want, because that upholds the ruling of the Speaker. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to correct Representative Nash. He said that Representative Winkler and Representative Long had ruled your amendments out of order. They didn't rule any amendments out of order. The Speaker did.
The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as judgment of the House? A yes or a green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or a red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the vote of the members participating remotely.
Gander.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 66 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 21, as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion? Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So after a couple of non-objectionable bills, I'm somewhat surprised to see this one on the floor. The emergency powers that led to this bill were caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, just as a reminder, more than 1.2 Americans have died from COVID-19, including over 17,000 Minnesotans. Excess deaths due to COVID-19 worldwide range between 13.3 million to 16.6 million. I'm honestly kind of surprised that relitigating the COVID-19 pandemic is a priority for the House GOP. Just look how well that worked for Governor Scott Jensen. But this bill goes so much further than the emergency orders related to COVID-19. Other recent emergency orders relate to George Floyd protests, authorizing the National Guard to help stranded motorists during winter storms, and flood relief. This bill places a nearly insurmountable obstacle for a governor to issue an emergency order under those conditions as well. I mean, look how hard it is for us to pass a bonding bill with a supermajority vote. This obstacle is not even necessary. The legislature has and has had the power to end peacetime emergencies by a simple majority vote. In times of crisis, it helps to have one elected executive decision maker to coordinate a response, while the similarly elected legislature has the power to rein in the executive if they overstep. Please vote no on this bill.
I recognize Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the complaints that I've been hearing, and especially when Representative Robbins introduced this bill, are about what happened under Governor Walz's executive orders related to the COVID pandemic. But that's not what this bill is doing. This bill is changing the entire scheme for taking up emergency powers for the next emergency. And that is a big difference. If you really wanted to address some of the specifics of what happened during that emergency, you would do it in a more tailored way. But that's not what is happening here. You haven't really been attempting to modify what the powers actually are. You could have a bill that limits some of these tools, but instead, this bill takes away most of the tools. It takes a chainsaw to the governor's ability to keep Minnesotans safe in an emergency. And that, members, that is reckless and it is dangerous. Legislators are not experts. Maybe we would all understand a cyber attack. I don't know, Representative Nash, if we would. Maybe we would all recognize that and everybody would say, okay, fine, let the emergency orders go forward. But many of us do not know how to evaluate scientific evidence. And I agree with my colleague, Representative Freiberg, it is really too important to hope that 81 House members and 41 senators will understand the seriousness of an emerging threat and be able to put politics aside, especially when you sometimes have to do things that are unpopular to deal with an emergency. And we've just seen a lot of you vote against letting the governor, for example, close a business, when in fact that might be exactly what is needed to keep people safe in the right situation. So what if, for example, little thought exercise here, what if we had an emergency that was so severe that 81 House members and 41 senators could not even convene? What if a lot of us were sick? What if there was some hazard that prohibited us from getting here? Now, maybe some of us could call in, but maybe we wouldn't be able to call in for some reason, and we couldn't even convene. That is what you are putting on the state. You are hobbling the ability to respond in what could be a very serious emergency. So before I move on to the next part, I just do want to recall, too, that the criticism of Governor Walz, while I'm sure even he would agree that he'd like to go back and make some decisions differently, he had to make decisions in an atmosphere of great uncertainty and a lot of information that told him that Minnesotans were really at risk. And although we can quibble and we can be angry, and some people are still angry about certain decisions that were made, he did keep us safe. And Minnesota had many fewer deaths than many other states. So the evidence shows that his decisions overall were not wrong. But in the meantime, the threat of catastrophic infectious disease incidents has actually grown. Some of this is due to vaccine skepticism or denialism, which we have here in our own state, and some because people move around the world very rapidly, bringing diseases with them. We know there are some agricultural practices that can create conditions for disease to spread, and it can jump to humans, as we're now seeing. Right now in our country, we're having an extremely serious outbreak of measles, which I know is a familiar disease to many, but we really haven't seen it in many, many years. And right now, and it is extremely contagious, far more contagious than COVID, by the way, because an infected person who may not even know they're infected can walk out of a room and then you can walk in, breathe that air, and get infected with the measles. So a Texas child actually just died of the measles, and this is a disease that we weren't worried about for a long time. Representative Freiberg already talked about how many people actually got sick and died from COVID, and I just want to remind you that even a Republican senator here in Minnesota died from COVID in the early time of the pandemic. Now we have other kinds of threats. We have avian flu, which Representative Nash, I think it was, also mentioned avian flu. We all came together to do what we needed for avian flu. But what if it was a little harder to do some of the things that are required? What if, for example, we had to shut down certain businesses? I'm not sure how many members would want to vote for that, honestly, even if it was actually the thing that needed to be done. We have many other threats. And some of them, as I said, are extremely serious. And I just want to mention that many of you are familiar with Ebola, at least a little bit familiar with it. We thankfully haven't really had that here. It's a disease that has a fatality rate of between 25% to 90% of people who get it actually die. And right now I want to tell you there's a new disease emerging just in the last few weeks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it has symptoms like Ebola, but it's not Ebola. It's so far unidentified, but over 5 weeks, hundreds of people have been infected and more than 50 have died. So members, unfortunately, we do live in a very dangerous world. And when these things happen, somebody has to be able to make a quick decision based upon expert advice. Already in our law, remember, if a majority of us decide to end the emergency, we can. The complaint from the other side is that you didn't have enough people to end the emergency. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the law. It just means you were on the side that didn't win. That's all. But this body is not designed to be the body that makes those quick decisions, and our track record, as Representative Freiberg pointed out, is not very good when it comes to making hard political decisions. So passing this bill would be a terrible disservice to Minnesotans, a terrible disservice. And not only to other Minnesotans, but to you yourselves and to your families. This could be the difference between life and death in some future emergency. I urge you not to make these changes and to vote no on the bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Hemmingson-Yager.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I just want to echo my colleagues talking about, kind of the inspiration for this bill is the COVID-19 virus and pandemic. I was not in this body, but I did watch everything play out, and it was a scary time, right? This was a brand new virus. Nobody had ever seen it before. Sometimes at first it was touch-based, kind of like the cold or the flu. Other times it was airborne, and then we went back and forth, and then we figured out, yes, it is truly airborne. So we're watching, and then not only that, but this virus, what made it so insidious is that it changed. And it changed fast. So by the time we got our hands around it, we had a new variant to overcome. And the symptoms changed a little bit, and it got more lethal. And then it changed again. And it got less lethal because viruses, they want to just infect people, but they don't want to actually kill their host. So it got less lethal, but the symptoms became a little bit more like the cold, and it became a little bit easier to spread. And that's exactly what a virus wants. So if you're going to take these powers away, we need leaders that are able to act. They need to have their right-hand people who are experts in this field. I am not an expert in cyber attacks. I do not want people waiting around for me to research all of this stuff and maybe form an opinion. That takes too much time. We don't have time when new epidemics hit. And just when we think we're getting a handle on COVID, I'm nervous for the next one. And we need that ability to have educated people in the room who know how to act, who know how to respond, and they can do an appropriate response immediately. So please vote no.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We had this bill in committee, and I want to start by saying that COVID was hard. And hearing the stories in committee of how families were impacted, how some couldn't be with a loved one when that loved one was passing away, was heart-wrenching. And we are all going to be impacted by the fallout from COVID for the rest of our lives. And I think we can say that reasonable people can disagree on the actions that were taken. There was no playbook. But this argument that those actions were so wrong as to require us to change our laws on how peacetime emergencies are declared is dangerous to public health, and I think is very clearly contradicted by what I think is perhaps the most important data. So I went and looked at deaths in this area, comparing Minnesota to its 4 surrounding states, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And if you look at 2020 and 2021, and this is age-adjusted data, if you average out those states and then look at how many more people would have died in Minnesota if our average was that average, it would have been close to 3,000 more people. So I think that there's clear data that says, you know what, there was no playbook, but it looks like there's a few thousand people more alive today because of our actions here. I also want to echo and to make sure that folks pay careful attention to another part of the argument being made, that the people need to be heard, that power needs to be limited, and that power needs to be shared. Well, this was brought up in committee. The people were heard. I think it was said that there were 20 different votes on extending the peacetime emergency. What this bill is asking is not for the people to be heard. They were. Power is shared. Power is limited. But this bill is asking is to give a minority of folks in the body a veto. Now, I will say that the data on the death rate is really important to look at. Thank goodness we didn't have this in place during the COVID emergency, because it seems to me that what the data is showing is there's about 3,000 more Minnesotans alive today that would probably agree with me.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you for the very robust discussion this evening. I am very thankful that we are having this conversation. As everyone will remember, 2020 and 2021 until the emergency ended were terrible times in our state for families, for students, for businesses, and we never want to go back to that. And members, this bill still gives the governor the opportunity to declare an emergency. It's just that that emergency will now automatically end unless there is a 3/5 vote of both houses to extend it. That's a common sense solution so that a governor cannot continue an emergency for 16 months. We never want to go through that again. I'll just remind you, members, that for those of you who were here, we had 8 special sessions, more than 20 votes. And to the point on the other side of the aisle, they were not thinking of the best interests or the data of the state. They were supporting their governor. Under my bill, it will take a bipartisan support, the same amount as it takes to pass a bonding bill, to extend the emergency. If there's a real emergency that requires that, we will work together and we will have bipartisan support for that, just like we do for bonding bills. So members, this is protecting the state from one party supporting their governor instead of the interests of the state. I just want to remind you what we went through and that we are still dealing with the effects of today. This is still impacting our families, people who lost loved ones, whose family member died alone, who they couldn't have a funeral service for. This is still impacting students. Schools were closed. Their mental health deteriorated. They were not allowed to play even outdoor sports for a while. Members, we are still seeing the fallout of that in reading scores, in math scores, in mental health and anxiety issues. The businesses that were closed, people who lost their entire life savings that they invested in a business that was shut down, the high inflation that we still are dealing with and the supply chain disruptions, people who couldn't gather, people who couldn't have people to their homes, even play dates for their kids, people for the holidays. Remember the NARC line where you were supposed to call and report on your neighbors having people over to their homes? The work habits that have been changed because all these businesses were closed down. Now people have not really gone back to the office. We have office buildings here in St. Paul that are empty because state workers haven't been gone back to the office. Downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, workers are still not back in the office. And we are seeing the fallout of that in our communities because of lost economic activity, because of increased public safety concerns. Members, we are still dealing with what happened in 2020 and 2021, that 16-month emergency. And this is our chance to change the orientation of how emergency powers work so we never go through that again. Under this bill, just to be clear, the governor still could declare a public emergency, but it would automatically expire unless bipartisan support in the House and Senate extended it. And if there's a huge crisis, I'm sure we will get that bipartisan support. So this is a common sense bill that we need to do to restore the balance of power between the legislative and executive branch of our state. And members, when you take your vote today, I want you to vote with the people in mind who we lost and who lost their businesses and have still ongoing challenges because of that. So for all the students, including my daughter, who didn't get a graduation, for all the students who had learning loss or struggles with mental health, for all the businesses who were closed, including in my district, and especially for my friend Tanya Lucas. She was a cancer patient. She wasn't a COVID patient. Sorry, I've never told this story publicly. Tanya Lucas, I knew her just from our Chamber of Commerce in Maple Creek, in the I-94 West Chamber. Shout out to all my 94 West Chamber friends. She had breast cancer during COVID, and her husband couldn't go visit her. He's a construction worker. So what did he do? And Todd, I have no idea if you're watching this, Todd, but I hope someday you see it. He's such a hero. He took his construction truck every night after work, go home, have dinner with his kids. His mother-in-law, Tanya's mom, would stay with the kids, and he would take the truck, go park under her window at the hospital every night while she was in treatment. And he would sleep there, and she would know he was next to her. And then the next day, when he had to go to work, he would take his construction cone, leave it in the parking lot, save his spot so he could come back the next night and sleep under her window. That is what families went through. We all know those stories. Every one of us had stories like that in our district. My own godfather died alone because of COVID. So members, we are not saying the governor can't declare an emergency. We are just saying he cannot have an endless emergency. Please vote green.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, we have a purely partisan bill on the floor that has no chance of becoming law. And instead of working to address the real challenges facing the people of Minnesota, like rising prices of childcare, groceries, healthcare, and housing, we are here again with a partisan bill. Last session, the DFL majority enacted paid family medical leave to provide stability for parents and those caring for loved ones. So far this session, the GOP has introduced multiple bills to delay or repeal that. We worked to lower the price of prescription drugs. This week, Trump's GOP in Washington is poised to cut billions from health care that help millions of Americans. We worked to provide for more enhanced food affordability, and we've seen proposals to zero out Meals on Wheels. The DFLers are fighting for a future where all Minnesotans have opportunities not to get ahead, not just the wealthy and powerful few, and this bill is fighting a fight from 5 years ago. House File 21 is a bill that would undermine Minnesota's ability to respond to public health emergencies and other emergencies and save lives. We heard today that we need this bill to stop a dictator and that we should trust our elected representatives. Well, guess what? That's what current law does. Current law has the check of the legislature. It requires just 68 votes to stop a governor from declaring an ongoing emergency. That is trusting our representatives. That is the check that we have put in place on our governor. We also heard that if there is a real emergency, there will be bipartisan support. Well, we had that test here in this chamber over and over again. We had a real emergency. We had the worst modern pandemic in COVID-19, and we had endless votes, and every single vote we had a partisan vote on whether or not we were going to allow the governor to take the necessary steps to protect our citizens of Minnesota. So unfortunately, we have had the test that this bill put before us, and we failed that test. We failed to show that we could, on a bipartisan basis, stand up for science, stand up to save lives. We didn't just vote with our governor because he was the same party. We voted with him because he was taking necessary action to protect our state. We heard that we are still dealing with the consequences of what happened. We are. 1.2 million Americans died from COVID-19. Many, many more Americans are still struggling with long COVID, including my constituents, including colleagues of ours in the state legislature. In times of crisis, we have to have one elected executive decision maker who can coordinate a response, while the elected legislature has the power to rein in the executive if they overstep. Let's be clear, Governor Walz's actions saved lives. Minnesota COVID-19 testing operation was a national leader that scaled up so rapidly because of the flexibility that was allowed under the peacetime emergency. The emergency powers allowed a state inventory of critical care supplies to ensure our hospitals and long-term care facilities have a place to turn in crisis. Millions of face masks, gloves, and gowns were distributed across the state because of these emergency powers. The Walz administration coordinated the distribution of hundreds of thousands of life-saving vaccines. If we had had a supermajority requirement, none of this would have happened. More lives would have been lost, period. Instead of relitigating fights from 5 years ago about the COVID-19 pandemic, I would ask my colleagues across the aisle to join us in focusing on the real challenges ahead of us, like tackling the affordability crisis that we are seeing right now on childcare, healthcare, and housing, and I'd ask for a no vote.
I recognize the Majority Leader, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, on March 13th, 2020, Governor Walz declared a peacetime emergency as our state prepared for COVID-19. At the time, none of us could have predicted that his peacetime emergency declaration would last 16 months until it finally ended in July of 2021. For 475 days, with the stroke of a pen and a loyal party supporting him in the legislature, Governor Walz unilaterally governed our state by executive order. Schools were shut down. High school graduations canceled. The trajectory of an entire generation of students was altered, and we're still dealing with the fallout. Countless Minnesotans spent their final moments alone, as we just heard the heart-wrenching story from Representative Robbins. Without the comfort of loved ones by their side, religious gatherings faced strict attendance limits. And Representative Liebling, you're right, that was unconstitutional. But it happened under Governor Walz. Small businesses were forced to close and operate under severe capacity limits, while big box stores remained open. Yes, we're talking about the past, but we have to learn from the past. We have to think about these examples, because while reasonable people should be able to agree or disagree with those decisions, we hope that all of us could agree that never again should a single executive, regardless of party, unilaterally make long-term emergency decisions without the input of the people's elected representatives. And if you don't agree with that, what are you doing here? We are the people elected by our constituents to govern. So unfortunately, under current law, a governor can declare a public emergency for 30 days, and that declaration continues indefinitely unless the legislature, by a majority vote in both chambers, votes to end it. And unfortunately, that can get caught up in partisan politics, as we saw. Time and time again during COVID, House Republicans fought to restore balance by voting to end the governor's emergency powers so we could work together across party lines to guide our state's pandemic response. Unfortunately, the governor, House Democrats, voted to exclude Republicans from the conversation and to stand by the governor and leaving millions of Minnesotans without a voice. That imbalance needs to be corrected, and House File 21 corrects that imbalance. It makes sure that emergency powers expire after 14 days unless there is buy-in from a supermajority of the people's elected representatives, 3/5 of both the House and the Senate. This is a critical and necessary reform because no single individual, regardless of party, should have the sole power to decide when an emergency is over. House File 21 restores the proper balance between the executive and legislative branches, ensuring that any emergency declaration beyond 14 days has broad bipartisan support from the people's representatives. I urge you to vote green. Restore the legislature's rightful role in our constitutional framework. Ensure accountability. Guarantee that the voice of the people's representatives will never be silenced again. Please vote green. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Whenever you're ready.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no.
The clerk will close the roll.
Madam Speaker, Niska changes from aye to nay.
Niska changes from aye to nay. There being 66 ayes and 67 nays, the bill does not pass. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to reconsider and request a roll call.
Representative Niska moves to reconsider, has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Is there any discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Gander.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 66 nays, the motion prevails. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that House File 21 be laid on the table.
This is a non-debatable motion, members. All in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. No. The motion prevails. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Johnson W. moves that House File number 1359 be recalled from the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Taxes.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Johnson W.
Madam Speaker, that is my motion. I would move that House File number 1359 to be called from Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Taxes. I have talked to the chairs for both committees and they agree.
Any discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Cagle moves that House File number 1520 be recalled from the Committee on Public Safety, Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Transportation, Finance and Policy.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that House File 1520 be recalled from the Committee on Public Safety, Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Transportation, Finance and Policy. This is a DPS technical bill dealing with documents needed for a name change on a Minnesota ID. I have spoken with both chairs and they're fine with it.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor, aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
O'Driscoll moves that House File number 1546 be recalled from the Committee on Workforce, Labor and Economic Development, Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Commerce, Finance and Policy.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. House File 15
46 should have been referred to the Commerce Committee. It is a bill that we'll be using to carry some of the body of the work that the committee carries this year, and it was inadvertently assigned to the Labor Committee. Have spoken to the Labor Chair, and as the Chair of the Commerce Committee, I support the move as well. Thank you, members.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor, aye. Any opposed? Motion prevails. I recognize the member from Hennepin to introduce a House resolution. Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we have a resolution here to honor Black History Month, and I'm going to kick off with this intro, and thank you for indulging me. From the moment the first enslaved Africans were forcibly taken from their homeland and brought to the Americas in 1619, their journey was marked by unimaginable suffering, but also by extraordinary resilience. Shackled in chains, stripped of their names, culture, and freedom, they endured the horrors of the Middle Passage and the brutal conditions of chattel slavery. Yet, despite centuries of oppression, they never lost their humanity, their will to survive, or their determination to be free. Through resistance, both seen and unseen, enslaved Africans fought for their dignity. They rebelled. They ran. They preserved their languages, spiritual practices, and traditions in secret. They laid the foundation for Black culture in America, infusing their strength into the very soul of this nation. Even after slavery's abolition, the struggle for true freedom continued through Jim Crow, segregation, and systemic injustice. But Black people have never been defined by oppression. We have been defined by our ability to overcome it. We built institutions, created music, and art that changed the world, led movements that reshaped democracy, and continue to be architects of change. From Harriet Tubman to Martin Luther King Jr., from Malcolm X to today's activists, our story is one of triumph in the face of adversity. The legacy of enslaved Africans is not just one of survival, it is one of strength, brilliance, and perseverance. We are here today because of their fight, their hope, and their unbreakable spirit. Their resilience lives on in us. As we honor our past, we commit to shaping a future where justice, equity, and true freedom will prevail. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and others will speak to the resolution.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hussein.
Whereas African Americans have made significant and lasting contribution to the history, culture, economic, and social fabric of the United States of America, and of course, our great state of Minnesota. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Omami Hildsley.
Whereas the African American community has played a central role in the movements of justice, civil rights, advancing democracy, equity, and fight against systemic racism. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Abaje.
Whereas African American History Month was established to recognize and honor the profound impact of African Americans in fields such as government, law, education, science, business, the arts, sports, and social activism. And
I recognize the member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Whereas Minnesota's African American community has a deep-rooted history with historical contributions in the Rondo neighborhood, civil activism, rights activism, political leadership, and the arts, all of which have enriched the state's cultural heritage. And
I recognize Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whereas despite progress, African Americans continue to face disparities in economic opportunity, healthcare, education, housing, and criminal justice, underscoring a continued need for systemic change in social justice. And
I recognize a member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Whereas it is imperative to honor the legacy of past leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, and Minnesota's own leaders, including Nellie Stone Johnson and Josie Johnson, while uplifting new generations of African American leaders. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Mahamoud.
Thank you, Speaker. Whereas the state of Minnesota remains committed to fostering inclusivity, racial equity, and the recognition of African American excellence and resilience in all aspects of society, now, therefore.
And I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the State of Minnesota that it recognizes February 2025 as African American History Month in the state of Minnesota.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Noor.
Be it further resolved that the House encourages all Minnesotans to participate in activities and programs that promote awareness, education, and appreciation of African American history, heritage, and achievements.
I recognize the member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Be it further resolved that copies of this resolution be transmitted to community organizations, educational institutions, public officials, and to encourage widespread recognition and engagement in African American History Month. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Announcements. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, March 3rd, 2025.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, March 3rd, 2025. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Monday, March 3rd, 2025.